Hi everybody, this is Bill Kenny, and we're going to get started with our webinar on when a negative is a positive, and essentially all about the development of feedback strategies for mentor groups, for student groups, for all different types of development type opportunities. And so in any event, as we get going, I'm sure there'll be more people that join. You may hear a beep periodically that indicates folks coming into the call. One of the things that we found does help the sound quality is if you're not asking a question or interacting, if you could put your phone on mute. That way we remove any background noise or potential interferences. We will finish right at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and certainly are more than happy to continue the conversation with anybody, whether that's in specifics around their situation or in any other fashion, in any way that we can be helpful after the call. We're more than glad to do that. So, well, let's hop in. So we're going to go through a variety of thoughts here and share some ideas, and certainly we'll open it up at the end for additional questions. And as you'll see, we've got actually some good questions to get the conversation started as well. So we think about negative and positive feedback. One thought that this brings to mind is the idea of a good and a bad cop. And certainly some mentor programs exist like this. They actually have mentors who are meant to be the hard mentors and mentors who are meant to be the easy mentors. And that may be the right methodology for your organization, but you may also find some additional answers. So our real focus today is to go through the opportunities here and help expose you to some of the different methodologies and systems that are out there. So just so you have some context in terms of my background and frame of reference, I'm the founder of Test My Pitch. We're an online platform that helps, could be students, entrepreneurs, or professionals improve their communication skills. And we primarily sell into the university or education market, into economic development, and then into the sort of enterprise arena. It just, again, for a frame of reference, in the last 18 months, I've been to well over 100 pitch events. So those are on university campuses or at accelerators and incubators or elsewhere in the community. Really just the only disclaimer here in this presentation is, we all come into this with a variety of frames of reference. We've got a fair amount of diversity on the call today, from economic development to education to various entrepreneur ecosystem type organizations. And, we're going to sort of reference a variety of observations that we've had and opportunities that we see. And they may or may not, all of them may or may not fit exactly sort of your frame of reference. And again, we're happy to sort of talk through specifics, afterwards or in the Q&A and whatnot. But our biggest endeavor is really to get this information out there and certainly do whatever we can to help your organization continue to evolve and improve. So when we've gotten a fair amount of really, really good questions, so we'll actually come back to these at the end, but I wanted to kind of at least preview some of the questions we've had. Some of this we'll touch on as we go through, but we'll make sure that we specifically answer each of these before we finish up today. So, and again, certainly think of additional questions as we're going through, and we'll stop, pause, and make time to answer your questions, additional questions at the end. So our agenda is simple. We're going to kind of set the stage a little bit. We'll talk about feedback itself and kind of map in the specifics of how we look at feedback. We'll talk about positive versus negative feedback and how it applies. We'll reference some important research in this area. We'll also look at 3 specific methods to consider for your program in terms of how to improve feedback and look at ways to balance potentially that positive and negative feedback. We'll also look at orientation and training of mentors, of mentees, and potentially even the connector individuals. So you might think of them as the concierge. And then we'll get into the questions. So buckle up, and we're going to have a lot of fun and certainly really looked at some important topics here. So by way of background, and I think this is probably good to sort of frame where we're going. So when we look at mentorship, the whole idea of mentorship is really to help someone evolve from a place of dependence. So mentorship today is used certainly all around youth or student development. It's used around entrepreneur development, employee development, reemployment development, business coaches. I mean, there's huge societies of business and life coaches and whatnot that are endeavoring to use mentorship to help evolve people from this sort of place of some level of dependence to a place of independence. And so that means that at some point, somebody may, ideally graduates from either needing mentorship or needing this type of mentorship, and that they evolve to needing additional or other types of mentorship. And so, but the goal is that we not create a situation of dependence, again, to get them on a pathway so that they become highly functioning and highly independent. So when we look at feedback is really a two-way process. It's certainly an individual sharing a thought, and it's also an individual receiving a thought. And most of the effort that we see in terms of feedback discussion, in terms of mentorship, focuses on the quality of the information the mentor is relaying, and not very much seems to focus on the idea that there needs to be a willing listener. And that's a really critical component. In fact, the listener, just like public speaking or anything, it's really the audience that should drive the message or the mechanism. And so, the first big point or the first paradigm shift here is we need to understand who the listener is, who the mentee or receiver is, so that we can properly focus the type of feedback and potentially the type of mentor that we would put with that individual. So when we look at feedback, there are really two basic types, and you might be able to sort of create additional types, but two that we really see as sort of paramount. We'd really look at this, right now we're looking out in this image, we're looking out a windshield of a car. And so that's one type of feedback we get as a driver of a car. And in fact, we can even see the rear view mirror. So our eyes are creating some type of feedback through the windows of the vehicle, where we can get all sorts of reference points to, are we on the road? Are there obstacles? Are there potential dangers merging in to us or near us? Are there children playing by the side of the road? Any of those types of things are really qualitative type feedbacks that we're getting by observation. Then we look and we have the instruments on our dashboard, and these instruments relate a totally different kind of information to us. They're very quantitative, and so they give us speed, they give us how much fuel we have, the temperature of our engine, what our RPMs are, how many miles we've gone, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't matter what kind of car we drive. In fact, we could be driving, the smallest economy car to the largest truck. You could even be in a marine vessel, a boat, or a ship of some kind, and have very similar types of feedback. And it really doesn't matter what type of vessel we're driving. The means of feedback are fairly similar. So when we look at these, we ask you to sort of relate looking out the window to qualitative feedback. It's sort of what we're able to get from our environments and any type of feedback that environment gives us. And then the dashboard is really giving us quantitative feedback. And today to the dashboard, we could add a GPS and, giving us our time to destination and specific directions and so on. And the highest value feedback you're going to find is when you actually can combine the qualitative and the quantitative feedback. It actually ends up being much more instructive. And so the easiest way to think of that is if somebody were across from you giving you feedback, and today most feedback is delivered orally, probably 90% of feedback or more is delivered orally in a sort of a mentor setting. And when you receive those maybe 3 or 4 comments from that mentor, the challenge you have is you've received these oral feedbacks. Which one do you weight stronger in terms of, how does that relate to where you are on various criteria or benchmarks in terms of what your goals are? And it's very hard for an individual to contextualize qualitative feedback, and that's where the quantitative feedback helps is to actually contextualize that information that we're getting qualitatively. So it's really actually kind of funny is the best feedback that most of us get is when we ask for money. So think of an employee who would like a raise. That individual will get incredibly good feedback when they go to their boss and ask for more money. Just the same as a salesperson who may have been having great meetings with a prospect, and it really seems like they're on the same page, and then they put the proposal in front of that prospect, and suddenly, with dollars and cents on it, and suddenly they get really, really good feedback about whether it's the product, the service, the application to that customer's use case, or whatever the situation might be. The same applies for entrepreneurs who are going for funding. The idea that they've gotten all this great positive reinforcement while they're building their business by their mentors and their community and so on, and then they go to the venture capitalists or the angel investors or the bank or wherever they go, and suddenly they realize that they have a lot further to go. And unfortunately, the system today sort of shortchanges many individuals, be they students or entrepreneurs or staff members or whatnot, who are looking to really perform better and really get into situations and set themselves up as best they can for success. And again, sometimes the wheels fall off of that process. So let's hop into talking about positive versus negative feedback. So when we look at positive feedback, they're really, we're all familiar with this. We get into situations where we get incredible reinforcement about what we're doing, and it is really helpful and encouraging up to a certain point, but then it begins to wane in terms of its effectiveness. Now we're excited and encouraged, but we're not getting any better. And so there's a certain point at which it needs to get more constructive. And so again, we've kind of framed this in positive versus negative. So, negative clearly can be difficult to accept, and we've invested heavily in terms of our point of view or idea or whatever it is we're working on that we're getting feedback around or on, and that negative feedback may be hard to internalize, it may be hard to hear. I suppose it doesn't change the feedback itself, which is potentially highly valuable. And so again, the positive feedback, and it's actually really kind of interesting when we go out and we do a lot of work in the entrepreneur community, when we talk to especially experienced entrepreneurs, people who have potentially built a couple of businesses or have built at least one business that scaled fairly well, is the one thing that they wish they had more of, and really they're fairly passionate about, is they wish as they were building their business, they had more and stronger feedback. They appreciated the encouragement, but there's a certain point at which that encouragement didn't really help anymore, and they really wish they had sort of more aggressive feedback to help them evolve quicker. So when we look at negative feedback, for the rest of this presentation, we're going to reframe that to really make it more about direct feedback. So if we look at positive feedback as encouraging, the idea of negative feedback would be to be more direct, and that may be positive or it may be negative, but the fact is that we're no longer as focused on encouragement as we are about improvement. And so this is where we kind of hop into this University of Chicago study, which was really compelling. So what they did was looked at the difference between positive and direct feedback, and they called it negative, but we're, again, reframing. But the idea of looking at, at what point does positive feedback become less effective and negative feedback or direct feedback become more important. And so what they did is on the x-axis they put positive and negative, or positive and direct, and on the y-axis they put novice and expert. And as you can see from the curve, as somebody became more expert or more experienced or better at what they were doing or more invested in it, then the feedback needed to become more direct. And they actually added to this that really where positive feedback is important and critical, and where we should spend a lot more time investing in positive feedback, is when we're trying to elicit commitment, when we're trying to engage and enroll people into a program. And, could be, that they're young and inexperienced or new to this arena, whatever the case is. But when they're early stage, the idea that we need to be positive, we need to really aim to assure that they come back again, and that they bring their friends. And we want them to come back a second and a third and a fourth time until they become a part of that community or that program. And then as they mature, we want to begin focusing on being more direct in our feedback so that they improve. And really, what you're looking at is a situation where we want to create more substance, where there's more for them to digest. They see more improvement and accomplishment, and that ends up being what engages and continues their participation. Because if we're always sort of superficial, if you will, or overly positive, then they, while again that may have been the right answer in the first few interactions, it won't keep them invested in coming back, because they won't see additional benefit from doing so. So let's apply that same idea to looking at sort of typical program stages. As we see it, programs sort of go from an engagement stage to an educate stage or a learning stage, and then to some kind of performing or exit stage. And almost any program that we've seen sort of falls in here. So early in the process, in the engagement stage, we see positive feedback focused on gaining that commitment. And as the process goes forward, as individuals become more invested and educated, and there's more learning going on, we transcend to becoming more and more direct, again, focusing on improvement and evolving skills and competencies. And let's throw one more sort of analogy to that, and that is, really early on we're focused on form, and later on we're focused on substance. So again, form is where we're excited that they can stand up and talk publicly, or that, not about the words they say, but the fact that they just stood up, and that's our measure of success. And then as they progress, we're going to get more focused on the substance. So much the same as if you've ever worked with a personal trainer, this is exactly how personal trainers work. At first, the first few sessions, they're focused on, not at all on the weight. In fact, you may lift something with no weight on it, just the bar itself. And what they're focused on is to make sure that you have the right form, that your feet are the right width apart, that your hands are the right width apart, that you're lifting with your legs, not your back. I mean, there's all these technique issues that they're going to be teaching you to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. And for a couple of reasons. One is that would be very discouraging if in the first couple sessions with no weight, you hurt yourself. And second is they really want to make sure that you build the fundamentals before you go on to lift lots of weight. And don't worry, by the 10th or 20th session, you'll be lifting 50, 100, or even hundreds of pounds, and they're going to demand much, much more of you, and sometimes really aggressively so. But again, early on, it's not about the weight. It's about technique and form and so on. So let's take a look at three models that will help really, I think, map out what direct feedback and what's possible with direct feedback. So kind of the traditional model of direct feedback is critiquing. And we see this if anyone on the call has come out of a creative school of any kind, art schools, architecture, all of the creative schools are very familiar with critiquing. And this is certainly where, more often than not, somebody shares something they've created in some way, and the community, their peers, their faculty, their cohort, in whatever form, gives them feedback. And in some circles, this could be a blood sport. But generally, people do not hold back. Quite often, these are competitive environments, and individuals are sort of barraged with points of view that are aimed ideally at adding to whatever work product that this person has created. So the positive is that you get sort of lots of information. The challenge of most critiquing is that it is all qualitative and all oral. And so this will make more sense as we go forward. So the second model is Socratic. So some are probably familiar with this method, but it's really where the person who's the mentor has no answers. In fact, they're generally forbidden from giving any answers. Everything that they communicate is in the form of a question. And so the whole goal is to cause the individual to think and to solve their own problem and to come up with potential solutions and talk through those solutions. And, really aimed at situations where, the individuals are not just solving the problem, but they're learning the skill of solving the problem, as opposed to sort of just evaluating all sorts of inputs that might come from critiquing. The Socratic, it may be a slower process, but it's one where it's not just aimed at getting to an endpoint of having a great product, but it's also aimed at having an individual who can solve their own problems and can critically think, and really about that skill building. There are actually organizations that we've done some work with and that we've seen that actually do not allow, and this is not just of their mentors, but of whatever cohorts they have, whatever student groups or entrepreneurs or staff groups or whatnot, but they don't allow anybody who is giving feedback to have a direct statement. Everything needs to be in the form of a question. So it might be, have you thought about X? Or have you tried Y? Or why is it you do it this way? Is there a reason why you wouldn't try this? But everything is aimed at causing somebody not necessarily to defend their point of view, but to think about their point of view, and so that they continue to evolve and justify and test kind of what they're doing. So the third method is referential feedback, and referential feedback really combines potentially the best of both worlds. You've got the qualitative and the quantitative feedback. This particular feedback is from a running race, and not even one I'm familiar with. I just grabbed it off the internet. But the goal was to show here that an individual can look at these results and see how they did sort of abstractly by themselves. How did I do versus sort of my expectation? And then they can look to see how they did versus peer groups. So, if maybe I was, seventh on the list of women in this event in the first group, the idea that I could easily go and ideally find and talk to Sharon or Jennifer, who finished first and second, and find out what they did different than I did. What did they do to train differently? What did they eat beforehand? I could observe them potentially in future races, or if they're nice enough, maybe even train with them at some point. And the idea that we can begin modeling the behavior of others, and I think that's ultimately one of the really difficult things about mentorship is mentorship, again, most of the communication is oral, and so it can tend to be very abstract. And so the sort of image the mentor has in their head is it transferring completely to the mentee's head in the way that the mentor intended, and so much easier to transfer a picture, if you will, or something that is quantitative and easy to identify. So if the mentor says, my gosh, let me introduce you to Sharon, and and maybe she'll train with you or share some of her wisdom with you about how she prepares. But that idea that we can begin looking at people who are advanced from us and understand not just the fact that they're ahead of us, but why and what it is that separates them from us. And that then allows us to begin working on those gaps and possibly even leapfrogging those individuals. And this is exactly what happens in athletics. And in fact, what's caused us to really look at how the sort of learning styles, adult learning styles. And this is a study that was done by the University of Michigan, and essentially showing that about 65% of the U.S. population learns their dominant learning style is visual. So here we are in mentor programs giving almost all of our feedback, if not all of it, orally, when that is it's a minority part of how adults learn. Adults learn visually, and the more visual references, again, think about driving your car. If we don't look out the window, we're not going to be very good drivers of the car. And if we don't have easy access to be able to see the gauges, we're going to run out of gas, we're going to go too fast, or there are going to be all sorts of things that potentially could happen. And so having visual references become important. And here's another sort of visual reference for you, and this is actually a tool that we created, actually launched about a year ago. It's called Score My Pitch, and it's for judging live pitch events. And it's the whole idea is to give visual references to for individuals who are in live pitch events. So it automates the whole judging process, but gives, as you'll see, numeric scores on criteria, and then also has strengths, and further to the right off the screen would be recommendations. But this is all feedback from whatever judges or individuals who have been sort of commissioned to give feedback. And again, the whole idea is that at the end of this, literally as soon as it's over, this is available so that an individual could easily see where they are in terms of the cohort they're in, or where they are sort of abstractly by themselves, and so that they could both learn from the information that's related directly to them, but also potentially learn referentially by where they are within their cohort or class or group. And that's really the idea. So kind of a key. So let's take a look at orientation and training. So you can develop sort of this whole schematic around what's the best program, but a lot of the real success is about how do we properly prepare sort of the individuals in our ecosystem to execute and implement this, and how do we know when we're successful? How does that all work? And so that's really what we want to get into here. So when we look at orientation, there are really a couple of components of this. We need to know our values, our principles, and our practices. And we need to make sure that that is disseminated, and you might call it a code of conduct, but disseminated and really inculcated through our mentors and mentees and our concierge individuals, or our connectors. And so some of the typical hurdles that you'll see that codes of conduct might address, the kind of on the simple end, from the standpoint of one of the complaints we hear some is that In some mentor networks, there are service providers. So there might be, in an entrepreneur network, there might be, attorneys or accountants or consultants of some form, and there's a concern that those individuals will use a mentor opportunity with an entrepreneur to sell them their services. And so a code of conduct would address that and, in fact, set very strict restrictions against somebody doing that, and in fact, probably have a process to excuse somebody from being a mentor at the first occurrence of that happening, and that there would be some kind of reporting back and forth. Codes of conduct would also aim to, sort of have a do no harm, charge no money, those types of things that essentially protect the mentee, where you're not going to give away their personal secrets, their intellectual property, relate any sort of confidential, again, personal or potentially business data to anyone else, these are very private exchanges, very private conversations. So codes of conduct, and it's not just a matter of just sort of words on paper, these need to be elements that individuals, not only any of the mentors and mentees, that they're familiar with these, they know them, that most organizations would have you sign off on the fact that you are, not just that you've read it, but that you're agreeing to the codes of conduct. And that creates a much higher degree of trust within the in the community. And so, and trust, really, ultimately, we're looking at integrity. So, we have to line up those values with our actions, and that intersection is where integrity lies. So then we need training, and so training can come in a couple of forms. It can be, sort of what happens when you sort of enter, and it could also be what happens on a progressive basis. So the training system is usually made up of these simple components, sort of the training itself, and that the materials, that all that information and the delivery, a periodic assessment of some kind, sort of benchmarking and checking, and then some augmenting, so some kind of continuous education, updating, examples of success stories, things like that, anything that will help, in this case, the mentor or mentee or concierge do their job better. And that's ultimately training, and that continuous training is a real key, because we want to make sure that, again, a lot of the time and energy and resources are put into making sure that the mentor is prepared, but the mentee is equally half of this exchange, and making sure that they're ready and willing to listen, that they're engaged, and that this is valuable. There's some organizations, actually, that we work with that are now going to a fee-based mentor program, and it's not big fees, but something where you're, really assuring that people are committed to the process, that this just isn't something nice and fun to do, but that they actually are investing themselves into it besides their time. So there's one organization, just as an example, that gives a free first meeting, and then it's $50 a meeting thereafter, or 3 meetings for $100. And again, you could be $5 per meeting. It really doesn't matter, but the point is that making sure that people are open to developing, because you, as any organization, wants to invest their time in those that are going to be most committed and open and focused on fulfilling their ultimate potential. And so when we look at these communities, there are really sort of 3 entities or 3 archetypes that need training and orientation. So you have the mentor, the mentee, which are very obvious, and then there's the concierge. And so there are some organizations, and very few, probably 1 or 2% that we see, that have developed or have purchased some kind of automation system to help facilitate connecting mentors and mentees. And even with that, there's probably still some human interaction to make connections. The vast majority, 98+%, are doing this all manually. So what that means is ultimately there's one or more people who have a high level of knowledge and intimacy of the mentors and the mentees, and they're able to make introductions and connections. And they probably have a series of events as well that are sort of collision events where mentors and mentees can meet and connect. But there's usually, again, sort of 1, 2, 3 people who act as a concierge and can make those matches and get people introduced who are very, are likely to be good fits, both from a sort of a need and skill standpoint, but a temperament standpoint or personality type standpoint as well. So that there's really a connection that may really be quite valuable. So we want to make sure in this that we also talk for just a moment about feedback in terms of being bad or good. And so we hear periodically organizations, someone will ask us, we're really concerned about the quality of the feedback that some of our entrepreneurs give or some of our judges give and so on. And so this concerns us somewhat. And that is, so what ends up happening in these cases is the organizations sort of withdraw sort of more and more degrees of feedback as this fear or concern builds. And I guess our point of view is that feedback can't be bad. It's ultimately it's just someone's point of view. It's perfect as it is. And so, it would be like saying that, sort of a customer's point of view isn't important and valuable, or an employee's point of view or a partner's point of view isn't important and valuable. If we're withholding these points of view or somehow preventing them from getting to the mentee, then they're losing the ability to filter, because they're going to need to, because not every customer is going to have the right answer for where the product or service should go, and not every employee is going to have the complete global view in terms of understanding sort of all the conditions and issues that the business is having to face and so on. And so there's, feedback is perfect and imperfect all at the same time. It's perfect in that it's someone's point of view and it's a data point for someone who needs input to make decisions. Just as, my goodness, we're driving our car, looking through our windshield, we get all sorts of conflicting data that we have to somehow sort through. And, we've had in our cars certainly had instruments that haven't been reliable, and maybe ones that, we know if we've been driving for a couple hours but the gas tank still says full, we know there's something wrong, and we would pull over and fill our tank or have it checked or whatever just to make sure we didn't run out of gas. So ultimately, part of the training of the mentee, it can't just be in a perfect world with perfect conditions. It's really about training them, again, if our goal is that they become independent, that they're able to discern what feedback fits their current situation and reality and what feedback doesn't. And that skill is something that they're going to learn experientially. Boy, it's hard to talk sometimes. But and so it's just the more they're able to exercise that, the better they're going to get at filtering and discerning what feedback fits their reality and what feedback doesn't. And they're not always going to judge that perfectly, but they'll learn over time, and certainly with good mentorship, that learning will be even better. And so we would really encourage sort of the notion that all feedback is perfect. So what goal do we have for you? So we've got a goal, and it's really around how do we get whoever, whatever your mentee pool is, how do we get them to move from a place where they have a limited set of inputs, maybe they're blinded in some way or in some areas. So how do we get the goggles off them so that they move from that dependence place to a place of independence where they can fly off and flourish? And by doing that, really having sort of contextual references so that it's much easier for them to begin using all of the indicators around them. I used to, and I still competitively sail some, but I used to competitively sail all around the world, and I can tell you that when I go out on a boat or even out anywhere, I am so observant of what the smokestacks are doing in terms of how the wind is moving them, to how the trees are moving, to all types of environmental situations. But I would only have that level of observation. I'm able to read the water, all different types of things, but I'm only able to have that level of observation because I've tuned those muscles. And so the more we know how to relate to the contextual references that are all around us, being able to look out the windshield and being able to interpret all of those indicators, to be able to look at our dashboard and to be able to interpret those. So having those qualitative and quantitative references, really, really key. So let's hop into the questions that were asked, and there were a couple that were really great here. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pace through these, and when I finish these, I'm going to open it up for other questions. So just so you have a notice that that's going to happen. Let's hop into these. So the first question is, how do you know when it's time to go direct or negative? So what's the right timing? And so, really just coming back to this grid, I don't have a better answer than this. It's really about knowing who the audience is, who the mentee is, where they are on this continuum from novice to expert, and then it's determining, am I really aiming to get them committed, or am I aiming to improve them, and then applying the right technique to that situation. Let's take a look at our second question. In fact, the next three questions are all pretty much in the same area. So how to reprogram mentors from grilling to coaching. Boy, I guess that sounds probably familiar to some. How to give feedback that motivates rather than offends. And then how to present feedback so it is perceived as constructive. So really from here, it's a matter of determining which of these tactics or which combination of these tactics helps with that. Are we going to, use critiquing? Are we going to be Socratic? Are we going to use referential points of view to help individuals understand how they need to evolve? And so again, I think the question is really how important is it to us? If speed's critically important, so feedback, one way to look at feedback. So with small children who are in danger, we have incredible feedback. In fact, almost any dangerous situation, right? We give commands, right? But if we see a child running out into the street, we give a very sharp command, or if we see them reaching up to put their hand on a hot stove, we go to a command. That may be analogous to direct feedback and critiquing, where we're really giving a direct, not necessarily a command with critiquing, but a direct feedback. And so, and that's usually, you might think of that in that we've got a short time frame to get somewhere, and so that might dictate that we do something a little more critique-oriented. But if we're really focused on developing the individual or individuals, and the sort of idea is less important and the individuals and their independence is more important, we might look more at Socratic and referential. So I think it really is very situational. Again, I think we could talk individually with anyone through these. So one of the things we get periodically around these, though, is the whole referential thing is kind of interesting, but I'm concerned as to how our cohort might respond to that. How are our students or our entrepreneurs or whomever, our staff, how are people going to respond to seeing how they rank? So one of our first businesses actually was an ice cream business. We owned a few stores, and we had a mobile truck for delivering ice cream. And as we were developing the business, we had occasion to actually, through the process, develop something that we called the employee self-management system. And this was a fairly considered process to help employees understand how to perform and how they could improve their performance. And so one of the things that happens in ice cream, and it sort of caused us to do this, was, your employees, our oldest employee, over 3 years owning this business, where she was 21 years old, and we had, sort of 21 down to probably 18 or 17. And so they had, there are two different types of shifts at least in this business. It was either sort of busy or not busy. And there were certain times of the day, sort of the daytime was less busy, the night was more busy. On the weekends, it was a little bit different schedule. But ultimately, if you had a 2-shift day, there would be one shift that would be, from a customer standpoint, much busier than the other. So our business problem was, how do we give that employee who's not in a busy shift motivation to perform like it was busy? And so how do they find joy, how do they find accomplishment in what they're doing when they don't have the same opportunity as the person who is, in a busy shift? No problem, man. It's always busy when there are a lot of customers. So, but those busy shifts we found were much better when the employees in the not busy shift performed better, because they did all the prep work to make sure that busy shift was much more successful. So we ended up creating a system where it was exceptionally public. Think of a whiteboard with everybody's name on it and points, and it was a whole system where an employee on their shift could determine exactly what they would do based on a whole point system that we had created around the critical tasks that needed to be done in the shop. So we had a number of points based on the revenue of your shift. And so that was certainly a big driver, but you could make up for that. In fact, quite often people who were on quieter shifts did better because they did a lot of the prep work, which was also worth a fair amount of points. So they would make decisions around, getting cleaning done, around, prepping cones and cakes, and doing all sorts of other functions within the shop that created points for them. And at the end of the week, we'd give away, a decent amount of money, and more than that, made it very public as to how people did and why. And so it was very easy for people who wanted to improve to see and model individuals who were performing better than them. And so it was easy to see, gosh, I need to, really look at what this person who's winning is doing so that I can model that performance. And whether it's competition or that interest in self-improvement, what we ended up experiencing was a shop that ran by itself. We had, and still to this day, and this is more than 10 years ago, we still have great relationships with all these employees. They call us for references all the time. But this experience for them was really, really positive, and one where they were able to develop a lot of other skills outside of just scooping ice cream. So let's see. Let's go to the fifth question here. So how to tell someone their idea is implausible while encouraging them to continue entrepreneurship or continue whatever it is they're doing. So, again, this may not be situational for exactly the paradigm of the person who asked the question, but I can't think of a better way than being Socratic, helping that individual discover their right answer ultimately is key, and that certainly will help them evolve much better. And again, these questions, ideally they come up with more ideas and better ideas and so on, and they may or may not have this mentor near them when they do, but their ability to learn the process of Socratic questioning and to be able to understand how to question themselves and evolve through that is really, really key. So the final question is how to properly match mentors and mentees. So there are lots of techniques for this. As I mentioned earlier, there are organizations, a very few, that have invested in technology to do this. Mainly, it is, this is a picture from Fiddler on the Roof, the matchmaker, make me a match. So there's that individual with lots of wisdom that makes connections. So that's all good, and that's sort of where the marketplace is today. There are the challenge of this, of course, is if the matchmaker gets hit by a bus, or something happens, or you grow beyond their ability to make connections, or they transfer jobs, or whatever the case is, you sort of lose that capability. And so what we're seeing is more organizations going to a situation where there are footprints being left by the interactions between mentors and mentees. And here's actually an example of what type of data can be available. This is actually from our Test My Pitch platform, and all of this information is exportable, so it's very easy to have, for whatever feedback is being given, to be able to look at, number one, how a mentee is progressing, but also what mentors are interacting more, what mentors are working with mentees that are progressing faster, so you can begin looking at efficacy and effect of different inputs. But ultimately, it's good. I think we're in a transition time where we're going from this sort of traditional, done by hand model to a place where we're going to be more data focused around the effect of various inputs, and that will help us make better matches over time, and maybe possibly do better education, better orientation, better training, but continuing to sort of improve how matches are made, but looking at tools to increase at least at this point, at first, really it's about how do we begin getting some data so that, as you get more data, you're able to begin looking at that in different ways to be able to improve decision making, and not just data for the mentees, which is what we talked about earlier, but this is really data for the organization so that the organizations can continue to make better and better decisions. So we've talked about positive and negative feedback and how to make some decisions around when they apply, and kind of framed a variety of topics within there. We've answered a series of questions that were submitted. What other questions exist? And feel free, if you'd like, to take your phone off mute and ask a question or make a comment. Well, I'm going to suggest that you certainly, if there are additional things that would be helpful for you, that we'll do a follow-up email with a quick survey, but that we certainly schedule some time to talk, and we'd certainly appreciate that, and we'd be more than glad to role play through anything with you. We do have our next webinar planned, which is really going to aim to talk about reinvigorating communities. So we did a few months ago a community building workshop, and one of the things that we really were focused on with that workshop was helping to, in terms of building a new community, but there are many communities that exist that aren't as diverse as maybe they want to be, or not as inclusive, or not as large, or not as integrated as they'd like to be. So we're really going to get into that topic of sort of how to take an existing community and reinvent it, reinvigorate it, to build and breathe new life into it. So just a quick couple of comments on our tools, and we're, again, more than glad to chat with anyone after, but we have two tools, and please let us know if you'd like more information. Our Test My Pitch tool is used to prepare individuals for live communication. So it's being used in schools, it's being used in incubators and accelerators and economic development organizations, and it's also being used at the enterprise level. But these are by creating private communities where individuals can, in a safe and collegial environment, draft, post, and get feedback on. It could be an idea pitch, it could be a funding pitch, it could be a sales pitch, a customer discovery pitch, it could be customer service related. We've got some teachers preparing for certification exams, doing all different types of classroom communication preparation using the tool. So a real variety. And then our Score My Pitch tool is used for live pitch events, for giving judge and audience feedback. So the whole idea is that there's all sorts of wisdom in a room at pitch events, and more often than not, in fact, like 99% of the time, when the event's over, that wisdom gets up and it leaves the room. And this tool collects all of that wisdom and aggregates it and feeds it back contextually to the individuals, not only giving an automated way to collect that information for the organizer, but a real easy way for the individuals to get very contextual, very referential feedback. So that's what we have for you today. You'll see my contact information here. Again, we'll follow up. We really, really appreciate your participation and are very excited for any way that we can help you, and certainly ask more questions, and we'll certainly get right back to you and would love to have a conversation. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.